Hello everyone, welcome back to Archangel RC. Merry Christmas to all, Happy Hanukkah or whatever you're celebrating. I wish you all the best. As fate would have it, the time has come to tackle the SIYI ZR10 gimbal. This thing has been in my possession probably for well over 2 years by now. It is one of the first production units that SIYI made, but it took quite a long time to get it mounted and properly tested due to not having a proper plane to do this on. For a while I was considering how to mount it on a normal plane, but I did not love the idea of it having to bounce around during a normal sliding landing, so I kept postponing it. I have used ZR10s on a few work projects with mixed success, but when I finally decided to put the MFE Hero together, a proper VTOL no less, I knew its time had come. Those of you who have seen my first video on the Hero know how the gimbal performed during the maiden flight. Short story, it was a horror show of lost horizons and wacky behavior, but I'm glad to report that after the latest updates, which SIYI sent me after that flight, it has been performing a lot better. I mean, try to imagine how insane it is to have the gimbal do basically whatever it wants and you try to fly by its video feed, or even worse, try to zoom in on something and it starts going left, right, up or down and the horizon goes haywire. Not fun at all and won't create much else than stress and annoyance, and that pretty much sums up the first flight. And now imagine me making this review 2 years ago with the old firmware. It would not have been a good one for the gimbal. So this delay might actually be beneficial for it. Following the updates, it was now performing a lot better. For instance, before, when I would have the gimbal stationary on the ground, it would start to drift along the yaw axis very slowly. It was more obvious when you were zoomed into the max, so basically it never pointed straight forward and you'd have to keep resetting it to center. The first signs that the update had improved on something was that when you do the same thing now, the gimbal no longer drifts to the side and the position is locked pretty well, which is a pretty big difference on its own. In the air it performed much better and was a lot more stable in terms of horizon drifts. There was the occasional small drift during turns, but it then rights itself once the turn is done and does not keep drifting on its own for no good reason until it rolls 90 degrees to the ground. Also, all of a sudden, the zoom is now usable when you know you can trust the gimbal not to drift. The waves visible in the video actually come from the prop I used at first, a 16x12 APC one, which was not very well balanced in relation to the motor. Once I balanced that, the waving in the video was greatly reduced and the enjoyment of being able to zoom in was actually greatly increased. And also, here is where the cruise mode comes in very handy. Since it maintains speed, altitude and direction, you can let go of the plane's controls and use the MK15's touchscreen to zoom in and play around with the gimbal while the plane does its thing. And as it turns out, it is pretty awesome to be able to zoom in on stuff from afar. In this example, I zoomed in on my location and you can see pretty well, and you can see people moving, you can even make out some details. When I zoom out completely, you can get an idea of how far away the plane is, around 2.3 kilometers in this case. So there is no way it can be easily seen or heard at that distance, but it can keep an eye on you without much trouble. And keep in mind, this gimbal has 10 times optical zoom and 20 times digital added to that. SIYI have a model with 30 times optical zoom, and I used that model on a project and the zoom is really impressive. And since it is all optical, it does not degrade the image quality when you zoom in. Also, 30 times optical zoom is more magnification than 10 times optical and 20 times digital. That 30 times zoom they advertise for the ZR10 is a marketing gimmick, and they're probably not going to be happy with me saying this, but the ZR30 gimbal, the one that has 30 times optical zoom, brings in the subject much closer in view than the ZR10 does with the hybrid zoom. But the difference in price is also substantial, so you get what you pay for. But back to the ZR10. With the latest updates, it does work well now. It is a lot more stable than before, and just look at this. I felt like a real spy. It really is fascinating, and yeah, if you do this a lot, perhaps it will get tedious and boring, but since I don't do this a lot, I do find it interesting, especially in mind with the possibilities it presents. One other thing that the updates fixed was the format the gimbal would record the video files in. Before, the files had an extension of 265. By default, no program can open this, but if you have the K-Lite Mega Codec Pack with the Media Player Classic installed, you can open the file via the Open With submenu and it will play it. However, you cannot seek the file, so basically every time you start it, you need to watch from the beginning with no option to skip forward. The update, thankfully, fixed that, and now we get proper video files with the correct extension, so they are making progress. Little by little, they are moving in the right direction. To add yet another cherry on top, recently I also managed to get the Mavic to gimbal data infusion working. Turned out there were some parameters I did not set correctly, and when I did and restarted the system, the fusion icon showed up in the SIYI FPV app, so apparently it was now working. Thing is, even after the updates, there were still some issues with the gimbal's performance, but SIYI claimed that getting the Mavic Fusion working would solve that, so since mine was now working and fused, I went flying the very next day. Right off the bat, I can confirm that indeed having the Mavic fused to the gimbal's data does make a difference. The gimbal looked a lot more stable and felt a lot more stable, but here is the funny bit. Now the horizon drift during turns is not towards the direction of the turn, but in the opposite direction towards the outside of the turn. How ridiculous is that? Look at this. Before the Mavic fusion, the horizon drifts towards the inside of the turn. After the fusion, it drifts towards the outside of the turn. Interesting, and perhaps definitely something they should look into. In any case, my test conditions were in loiter mode, doing large circles. I would assume this would not be as noticeable or present during normal use in a straight line with very few turns. But still, it is a funny effect. Other than that, it seemed to work much better than before and was a lot more locked in, feeling a lot more stable than before, which was pretty impressive in its own right, since I've never had a SIYI gimbal perform this way until now. I did have some great fun with it, zooming in and out on stuff. I set up a loiter mode above me, with roughly me in the center as much as I can set it up, and tried to aim the gimbal in my direction at maximum zoom, and I have to say, it is a lot trickier than it looks, and it does require practice. Plus, at times the gimbal would overreact to my input, or perhaps I am overdoing it, which would lead to some pretty aggressive movements and me completely losing the target. I can tell you right now that something like this, without a dedicated joystick for it or a touchscreen where you can drag, would be very close to impossible if you're using the radio sliders or rockers to try and keep the subject in frame at that zoom level. I am currently waiting on the new SIYI Uni RC7 Pro radio system, and it's supposed to have a small joystick for the gimbal. Guess I will know if and how well that works soon enough, though I feel like in any case the best option would be a separate dedicated stick, just like the main sticks on the radio, because that would give you the best control precision. It is no coincidence that exactly such sticks are used on the high-end military grade stuff. After some practice on the touchscreen and after going a bit higher, it became easier to keep myself in frame, but still it does require conviction and concentration to get it done right. I also zoomed in on some mountains that are roughly 40 or 50 kilometers away in a straight line, and I was able to keep the frame on the peak. You can see the ski slopes even, and that is despite the plane turning constantly in its loitering. Did the same to the close by mountain top, the one I used to frequent quite often before they installed something up there which completely ruined analog 5.8 GHz flying in the area. Have not tried to get a digital system up there yet though, so there is still hope. So yeah, once you get the hang of it, the ZR10 does work well and can be pretty useful. But apparently it does need the Mavic Fusion to do so, and even so it is a bit buggy at times and does some weird stuff on occasion, but I hope these things can be ironed out with future updates. Also, I can't help but wonder if there is something lacking in the gimbal's performance due to the fact that every SIYI promotional video has their gimbals mounted on a copter, not a plane. Could it be that tuning it on a copter only might yield different performance than if you take planes into account as well? I have no idea, just theorizing here, but it might be worth considering. But here I will have to again dip, or more like dive head first, into territory that SIYI are most likely not going to appreciate, but I feel like constructive criticism especially public one, should be a good motivator to get your head in the game and get things done right. And if they are serious about their stuff, this will not affect my relationship with them in a negative way. I have been talking to them for years, nagging about all sorts of stuff and issues I've had and found with their HD systems and their gimbals, and don't get me started on the SIYI FPV app back then. It was lacking a lot. But after all that nagging, I do see the improvements happening, albeit very slowly. Over the past 2 years, I have been involved with various projects, all of which used SIYI gear to get off the ground. And this included every gimbal SIYI have to offer, including the new-ish ZT6 one. And I can tell you this, despite having the latest updates all around at the time of their use, had performance issues in flight with drifting horizons, absolutely bonkers behavior during turns for the ZT30 gimbal if it's pointing in any other direction but straight forward, and more stuff of this sort. Granted, they did not have the Mavic Fusion working, as I never was able to get it working back then, so this ZR10 is the first gimbal which I actually managed to get it working on, but even without it, it was performing better than what I've seen over the past 2 years. In contrast, one of the projects required a small camera with a day and a thermal sensor, and since SIYI did not yet have the ZT6 out, the project got a Topotech gimbal. This gimbal was easy to get running on the SIYI system and was an absolute rock-solid performer in the air with no bad habits to speak of and a pretty much no horizon drift that I can recall. You can even feel the difference just by pushing the SIYI gimbal by hand and by pushing the Topotech by hand. The Topotech was a lot stiffer and did have a lot more resistance to you pushing on it. It was brilliant, and all of this without having to resort to Mavic fusing. So apparently it is possible. Question is, why isn't it possible for the SIYI gimbals? Also, since Topotech do not have their own HD system, the gimbal is designed to be usable with anything out there. So basically, even though it had 2 sensors on board, there was only one stream coming down, and you can see one or the other or both sensors together combined into one stream, which made it so that they kept the data rate constant for the downlink and consequently did not compromise the range. The SIYI gimbals, however, do not combine sensor outputs, so each one has its own stream to the ground, and in the case of the ZT30 with its 3 sensors, that amounted to almost 1 megabyte a second, which severely limited the link's range compared to a one-stream setup. If you notice here, on my Hero, I am using the SIYI FPV hub, which essentially allows you to connect 2 gimbals or 2 cameras to the HM30 module, and you're able to see all of them on the ground at the same time. I have the ZR10 and the R1M camera connected, and if I have both of them visible at the same time, the data rate goes over 600 kilobytes a second, which would not give me the same link range as using just one stream. A single stream is between 200 and 340 kilobytes a second, and would give you the most range, which is ironically how I'm using it right now. I don't have both streams enabled at the same time, but I switch them in the SIYI FPV app from the settings tab. Yes, it is a bit clunky, but keeps the data rate low, which has allowed me to get out to 9.5 kilometers with reliable video with the MK15 radio using the stock directional antennas, the smallest ones that come with a radio, aiming them by hand, which is quite impressive. If I had 2 or more streams, that distance would only be a dream not come true, and potentially by a lot. SIYI claim that currently they do not support switching between the streams with a switch or a button on the radio to keep only one stream active and keep the data rate down, but who knows, it might be something they would be willing to add to the SIYI FPV app down the line with enough nagging. Even at 8 or 9 kilometers, with the small antennas, I was able to easily switch between the 2 streams, which was pretty nice, as I can fly with the static camera when I need to be aware of the plane's attitude, and then switch to the gimbal when I want to look around and zoom in on stuff. And I'm still able to make full use of the link's range capability. So SIYI, there is still much work to be done, and I hope we can actually get it done. I am hoping to be able to take it up into the clouds at some point when the right conditions present themselves and be able to zoom into clouds. Not sure how it will work exactly, but I feel like it will be fun to give it a try. Plus I will have some stabilized footage more stabilized than an action camera on its own, and I will be able to look around in a smooth way and will have some proper 4K recordings of that. Granted, it will not be at the 100 megabytes a second that most modern action cams are capable of, but it will still be okay and would probably look good. This plane has been a very good performer so far, and with this new 8S battery it is showing real promise for long range, but the battery endurance runs and tests with different props will be in a separate video. To see, I can only say that I really like their products a lot. I mean, I keep using them. And I like how easy they are to wire everything up and get it running. They have probably the most user-friendly system out there that can give such a range, and for the most part everything works relatively satisfactory, and their HD link is pretty impressive for what it is and how far it can reach with the proper antennas. So I hope they will take this video for what it is supposed to be, a valid criticism of some drawbacks within their products which need to be sorted out to make this system even better. I will not stop pointing out the problems where I find them, so be prepared. I see great potential in this system, so I will help however I can. Now, thank you for making it so far into the video. If you have liked it, don't forget to like, share, subscribe and notify so you never miss a new one. Product links are in the description below as usual. A huge thank you to all my Patreon supporters and anyone who has supported this channel in any way. Fly safe, have a happy New Year celebration, and I will see you in the next one.